Hello everyone, hope you're all having a good day. Name's Tony, the Ambitious Autist, and today I'm going to cover a very interesting topic I came across these past few weeks. For context, I was scrolling through my Twitter feed when I saw a thread about social interactions and first impressions between people with autism and people without. Reading through it, I actually felt pretty upset throughout the whole process, which, yeah, those are the parts I'm going to go ahead and get into. But I also felt more understood as a person reading through this medical journal. Seeing what they found and correlating with my own experiences really allowed me to have a new viewpoint of how I interact with those around me. Now, of course, I want to state this like with every other video. My own experiences are not the same as everyone else's, but different perspectives are always a good thing to have, so just keep that in mind. Enough with the teasing and disclaimers, let's get it on rolling to the first part of the video, which is I think we should get started with a simple rundown with what the study was and how it was conducted. Then I can go into a bit more of specific details I can go ahead and say. So this study was conducted with the idea of finding out, does the first impression of an autistic person to a neurotypical person make it so that you are deemed less favorable in terms of judgment of personnel? With that question in mind, I might have triggered some people, but if you stick with me, we might be able to learn something valuable. Regardless, this study also asks if does the first impression also affect if the neurotypical person interacts less with the autist over time. Both are interesting questions to go ahead and tackle, both of which were conducted using 3 different studies. The studies in question we'll be covering in separate sections, to keep it all organized. Before I get to that though, the journal does a good job with identifying those with ASD, which is autism spectrum disorder, having impairments with social interactions that contribute to social disabilities and poor functional outcomes, as they call it. The impairments lead to small social networks and fewer friendships, difficulty securing employment and keeping it, high rates of loneliness, and an overall reduced quality of life. If you couldn't just go any lower than that, I mean, hell, that's crazy. This even affects those with high-functioning autism. Average or above average intelligence be damned. I know that this is a lot to take in. It was for me when I first went through with it. When I read through it the first time, I ended up getting pretty upset at the text. I found the next piece to be interesting, however, in that it describes the social interacting quality differs to these factors. Some you may know, because you do it yourself, some you may not know. Abnormal facial expressivity, anomalous use of gaze, lower rates or unusual timing of expressive gestures, violations of personal space, and unusual vocal prodigy, which is simply just the way you speak. Honestly, I did not know when I went through the journal what that word was, but now after going through it, I know what it is. And with those factors in mind, unfamiliar observers find those ASD individuals as awkward or odd, to which then it leads to less interaction and a lesser quality of social life. There is also the fact that not only does the ASD person's challenges and differences cause issues, but the societal viewpoint of ASD, such as the negative attitude, systematic barriers, or lack of accommodation, also affects their social life. All of this text is simply the facts painted by numerous amounts of medical findings, research, and researcher to pure observation. But you can see how these factors could correlate into interacting between an ASD and a neurotypical, in that the first impression is important no matter what side of the coin you land on as a person. But how large is that gap between the two? Does one really have more disadvantages than the other, or can it be mediated through education, learning, therapy? To find this out, come with me to observe the first section of this study. And it goes off a little something like this. Okay, well, starting off with looking at the research closely, we have the first study, where it was framed as a mock audition of a game reality show called The Autistic, where it included 5 types of standard communication: audio only, visual only, audio-visual, static image, and a transcript of the audio itself. The reason they did it like this was to try and see what makes a first impression work, and to see the differences on how people react to the person who has ASD. For the record, it was measured by movement, speech, or conversational content. All of these can play a big role on whether or not a person wants to interact with you or not. There were 40 adults in total, 20 ASD and 20 neurotypical, both divided by sex, and each were perceived by these factors: attractiveness, awkwardness, intelligence, likability, trustworthiness, and dominance/submissiveness, as well as the willingness to live near the stimulus participant, the likelihood of hanging out with the stimulus participant in their free time, the level of comfort sitting next to the stimulus participant, and the likelihood of starting a conversation with the stimulus participant. Now, I know you all are itching to get right into the results, so let me break it down for you. Overall, in this study, the ASD individuals rated lower than neurotypical individuals, though they rated near the same on the live near, trustworthiness, and the intelligence variables. The only one we can rate higher on between the two is awkwardness, which, yeah, that makes sense. Looking at the presentation methods, it gets interesting. Both ASD and neurotypical people are nearly the same on audio only, but the ASD peeps end up falling short on every other category, with the lowest being audio-visual. If you remember when I mentioned abnormal facial expressivity, anomalous use of gaze, lower rates of unusual timing or expressive gestures, violations of personal space, and unusual brochoprodisy as means of how people would perceive ASD people as awkward or odd, then I can see why it was rated the lowest, because audiovisual communication ties within every angle possible, and those factors could be off-putting to those neurotypical folk. Due to those factors and the awkwardness, it leads to less people willing to talk to those with ASD. Do note that for the whole study, no matter the sex, the results were around the same for both. So what did we learn here? Well, as we can see, it appears that the higher rate of awkwardness with those with ASD is leading to less people willing to interact, which leads to less friends, less networking, and higher rates of loneliness. You know, all that type of stuff. If I have to be honest though, the idea of auditioning for a game/reality show is a little unlikely of a premise to take in real life. It's not common that you would be in a game show unless you're in Los Angeles or, New York. Perhaps there is another study though. Maybe one that can be shown as a case of communication between friends in real life? I wonder if that exists. Yeah, it does. And it's part of the same paper. Study 2 is our next study, which consists of having 12 adults with ASD, about 2 female and 10 male, plus 16 without it, 7 female and 9 male, as people who will be asked to talk with an experimenter. The groups were matched on age and on IQ. Meanwhile, 37 undergraduate students, 18 female and 19 male, were raters and provided informed consent, which basically just means that they were reviewing the people that they were studying on. In terms of the experimenter and subject relationship, they would ask casual questions. And what I mean by casual is, stuff as telling them, hey, did you go ahead and see that new movie last week? Or did you go ahead and go to anywhere new? So that they could respond more comfortably. The raters, on the other hand, were ones who rated photos of the conversations, to which they made judgments from 3 questions. How socially awkward is this person? How approachable is this person? And would I see myself being friends with this person? On who is rating who, it's quite simple. Males only rated males and females rated females. Although, if I'm being honest, I have no actual idea why that's the case. Honestly, I thought it would be split, but I'm not the one doing the study, so I can't judge on that part. With that in mind, the ratings were made using a slider from not socially awkward to very socially awkward, with values between 0 to 1. So 0 to all the decimal points, and then 1. For those who are just saying, oh, this long explanation, just get to the results. To which, yeah, no worries, I got you. On the first round of the ratings, the raters only looked at the first image of each subject. Across all the rating categories, the people with ASD were rated less favorable than with the neurotypical people. Again, seeing a trend between the 2 studies. ASD were higher with how awkward and lower with how approachable and with the likelihood of friendship. Interestingly enough, with the small sample size of women with ASD, there were cases to be made that they might even be even lower than the ASD men in all the categories. And that's not great. And to be honest, I feel like there should have been a bit of a balance between the 2 sexes in terms of getting more women or just having an equal amount of the 2. But I digress. The researchers then asked if it changed over time to the raters, to which it did not. It remained consistent, with each of the ratings being around the same rating per person. However, as noted on the chart, we can see that not every person with ASD has these issues with awkwardness, approachability, or friendship, as we have one participant who rates more with the neurotypical people than with the ASD people. So hey, at least we know that not everything is applied across the board, and that's the case with every medical study. The sample size alone does not reflect what everyone thinks or the generalization of everything, that it all works in only that way. But it does give a good guideline, which is why I'm going through and telling you all this in the first place. Anyways, I want to go ahead and cover the last study, which is different from the other 2 because this actually covers the child side of social interaction and first impressions. Now, I know that there are a lot of viewers of mine that are parents of these children, which could help you out with those youngsters, so keep close attention. This study uses 14 boys, 7 of ASD and 7 neurotypical, and they are all at least 11.5 to 12 as the subjects. The raters were 125 adults between the ages of 19 to 64. And in contained with those adults are the sexes of 53 males and 44 females. They also had 33 kids, with 23 guys and 10 girls. The ages on those were not specified though, probably because of confidentiality between children information. The task for the subjects was to recall stories that contained happiness, surprise, fear, and anger. The rated video clips were made by showing all 4 emotions with at least a sentence or phrase in each. Speaking of the raters, the adult raters viewed one of the clips and answered 5 questions based on the child's overall awkwardness, their likelihood to start a conversation with others, the likelihood of having a lot of friends, the likelihood of getting along with others, and the likelihood of spending a lot of time by themselves. With that, the raters can rate using a slider, with not likely and very likely being the 2 extremes. The child raters did the same process as the adults, but they only rated 3 out of the 5 questions: the overall awkwardness, if they get along well with others, and spending a lot of time by themselves. Disappointing as it is to hear for some. The ASD subjects were rated less likely to start a conversation with others, less likely to have a lot of friends, less likely to get along well with others, more likely to spend time by themselves, and were rated to be significantly more awkward than their neurotypical peers. Even when reviewing all the segments separately, the results were consistent across the board with the raters. Well, specifically the adult raters. I say this because we also have the kid raters. And what about those kid raters? Surely they have a different response, right? Well, no. And that would be wrong, because the children still rate their subjects as less likely to get along well with others and more likely to spend time by themselves. The awkwardness, however, did reach about the same level as adults. So, great, another kick in the foot. I don't really have a clear reason as to why, but perhaps the level of perception children have compared to adults? Maybe. Remember, I'm looking at this from an outsider's perspective. I don't really have a clear picture, but I can inform based on the information, so that's what I have to do. Across all the 3 studies, it seems like the awkwardness is actually the factor that leads to every other factor falling in line with each other. With that, it doesn't matter who, whether it's adults, teenagers, or children, if a neurotypical can perceive you as someone who is awkward upon first impression with either a visual or an audio cue, they will be less inclined to interact with you socially. The interesting thing is, not every trait was perceived negatively, only the ones associated with social appeal and approach behaviors, not the ones with competence or character, which is interesting, at least to think about, of course. So, with everything we have in mind up until now, what can we do? As people, both neurotypical and ASD individuals want social interaction. I think that's a pretty clear opinion amongst everyone involved. Remember, and I do mean this, being friends with each of our own groups is a simple task to handle, as an ASD person might have a better time with an ASD friend, and vice versa with a neurotypical to a neurotypical, because we all got that point of relation between each of those, 2 groups, But when it comes to making friends across the pond, that's where we're gonna have a bit of a tricky issue. I doubt we're gonna be able to change the minds of everyone in the world, as much as I will try. But what we can do as people with ASD is try to recognize ourselves on how other people view them as potential friends or partners. That way we can act accordingly toward those people. Although I will say that I myself am comfortable in my own skin being autistic, so in that regard, for me and anyone else like me, we could target awareness and acceptance in those neurotypical groups. You know, teaching our friends, close family, classmates, etc. No matter how we go about dealing with this topic, my reason for showing it to you all is that social interaction is a bit of a pain to deal with for anyone with autism. And it varies pretty extensively across people. I know for me, it's a bit of a pain. So why not learn how I can improve on speaking to others? And if I get to improve on the first impression, then why not? Really what this all boils down to is that ASD peeps have got issues with interacting. And we either gotta reform ourselves or reform the neurotypical public opinion. So, let's try both. See how it works. Maybe we don't have to change ourselves completely to satisfy ourselves to others. Maybe, just maybe, only time will tell, as they all say. Sorry for the long tangent on this whole study. I hope you all ended up learning a thing or two. I'll leave the study link in the description below if you all want to go ahead and take a look at it. Also, poor transition, the description also has the like and subscribe button. Please do me a favor and do those two things. I'd really appreciate it because it helps me develop this channel into what I want to be. And quite honestly, that helps me out. And with that done, this was Tony of the Ambitious Autist signing off. See you on the next video. Take care.